CWC's Family Connections. I'm here with Pastor Jason.
Hello.
How are you? Well, I shouldn't ask how you're doing because I know you still have a cold. So you've still got the man voice.
I still do.
Your students must be impressed with you.
Yeah, they make fun of me. So
yeah, well. So we are still in long suffering.
Yep, and it's still the theme.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because you mentioned that the passage that we're looking at, 5:12, and I'd never really thought of how out of place that is when you take it the way everybody seems to think it means it. But when you look at what's before it and after it, you're right. It's almost like James went, oh,
yeah,
I got to put this down before I forget it, and then he forgets to put it where it's supposed to be, and that's not what it is at all.
No.
And I was really surprised to see that. It was really an enlightening.
Yeah. Well, when I study, a lot of times that happens where you feel like this verse doesn't really fit in this flow until you look deeper, and then you realize it's exactly where it needs to be, obviously. It's just that either the translation or my understanding of it is lacking. So.
Well, it really made me stop and think about how I do things. And I know a couple of people that I've talked to also have said it was quite an impact on this whole idea of do not swear, where it's like we do try to make things fit according to how we want them or how we perceive them. And we end up coming up with a false idea of what's going on around us, but we also end up coming up with a false idea of who and what God is and what he's up to.
Yeah, absolutely. And there again, James was warning us that we as human beings are going to do that frequently, and especially when we're under circumstances that we don't want to be in, and we're trying to find reasons as to why this is happening and what is God doing. And so, just like I said on Sunday, we tend to have some facts and then just fill in the gaps and put it all together and try to produce a picture and come to some sort of conclusion. And we find, as James was saying, because human beings like to do that, the majority of the time the conclusion is wrong. And he warns, because I'm a human being, because I know that that's what we do, above all else, this is the top priority. Do not do that. Otherwise, it just leads you down, like you said, just with a false picture of God, with a false picture of what he's doing. And then as we tell other people our false conclusion, then it becomes a false witness and so it continues to lead down a path that really doesn't display God in what he's doing. And so he basically says, just sit back and watch. And when you need to know, you'll know. And if you don't need to know, then don't try to figure it out.
Yeah, because you mentioned there that we end up getting into a spot where we use some of what we've filled in to point fingers and blame. And that is so destructive to community and to relationships. It just is terrible what we do to each other sometimes in assuming some of these things. Yeah,
and I think especially James, as the pastor of this Jerusalem church, understood that if people do that, it's going to create conflicts all over the place. And so whether it's church issues like gossip or trying to figure out what other people are doing, there again, we naturally do that. So if we can stop doing it with God in our circumstances, then that should put some sort of a rein on us doing it with each other. And if not, then we just continually do it all the time, and we feel like we're justified in whatever actions that we have, and it really does create a big mess.
When you think of it, this would have been so. Text message, thank you, Jesus. This would have been so critical to them back then, because I think of the fledgling church at that time, and the issues that they would have been dealing with, because the message of Jesus was so radically different to anything that they had lived through. Do we invite Gentiles in on this? Do we not? How do we deal with the food things? How do we deal with the circumcision things? This, that, and the other thing, and all of this stuff. I'm sure a lot of people were sitting back going, God's not going to want to do this,
Right.
and making assumptions about what was going on.
Right. Yeah, and there again, as they were trying to figure out some of even the doctrinal issues as far as what are we going to stand on, James says, let's see what is true, and we're going to stand on that. And what is not true, we're going to have a voice and reject that. And so it really was a time, like you said, if there was going to be ambiguity on people's different conclusions and what they thought things meant, it was really going to create a lot of mess. And so he's pretty clear that above all else, we really need to make sure that we do not do this. And like you said, it creates just a false picture of who God is. Yeah. And we as the church, if we're going to put him on display and we're putting something false to those who are watching, then that's on us. And that's why I said, if you do this, condemnation, judgment is going to fall on you, because you're the ones that God wants to work through. Yeah. So if you step ahead of him or you step aside from him and put this on display, you're going to be held accountable.
Well, you brought up the fact that you're stepping out of your bounds.
Right.
And that was really an eye-opener. And it made me think back to because I'm still chewing over some of the stuff that I was reading on idolatry and so on. And it's in that same vein there. And we put our own image of God ahead of what he really is. And that's who we start presenting to the world. And
right.
That kind of hit home. The examples that you gave too out of Job, I mean, 4 minutes.
Yeah, it wasn't quite 4 minutes. I timed myself, and it was like 10. So
but
I thought I could do it in 4, and I just...
It was church time.
I overextended my bounds, so...
Yeah. But
10 minutes.
Yep.
Yeah, 42 chapters in 10 minutes.
That's still not bad,
Yeah.
But it when you think of that whole story of Job, and his friends especially, we know what you've done wrong. We know what's going on. You need to listen to us. Mm-hmm. And they have not got a clue. And I think of how it is so easy for us to look around and we're in this situation, or you're in that situation because, and we don't have a clue.
Right. Yeah, and so you can see that this continues to occur all the way through church history, and so James, the fact that he addresses this right away, it must have been an issue there, and it still is an issue now. Yeah. And to see a warning of saying, if you are trying to stand on some sort of a platform and it's full of holes, and you've tried to fill them with false statements, even though they sound good, maybe you found them in Scripture or wherever else. Just because, C.S. Lewis says, just because you can put a bunch of words together doesn't mean it makes sense.
Right.
And that's really what we're dealing with here. James is saying, if it's not the truth about who God is, then don't say it.
Well, that was the last point that I wanted to bring up that you had talked about with what let your yes be yes and your no mean no means. Because most people think it's just stand your ground and it's not that at all.
Right. It really is. Those phrases say, seek the truth. Find the truth and stick with that. Don't go any farther, but have a pursuit of the truth. But then as you see what's truth, you'll also start to see what is not true.
Yeah. So
stand on that as well, and be firm on the separation that truth presents. And there, it's discernment, but it's not discernment based on our own understanding. It's the facts. And there again, that can be challenging for us because it still doesn't give us the full picture. And so when we are looking at the full picture and there's a bunch of holes missing, we are impatient as to allow God to show us what we need to know when we need to know it. And so it's human tendency to just say, well, God must not be, keeping up his end of the bargain, so I will just fill in. And there again, church leadership, those of us who speak from the pulpit or even claim to have Christ live within us, that's a big risk to take. And it should humble us enough to say, I really need to be careful of what comes out of my mouth, what I put on display, if I am going to call myself a Christian. Not because of behavior, but because I'm telling the world this is the heart of God.
Yeah.
And if it's not, then I'm held accountable for that. And I think that James wanted to get that point across, and honestly, that's what God's pressing on me to say, you can say these things, but do you live these things?
Yeah.
And so long-suffering, which is the theme all the way through here, puts us under that pressure to basically build the character that we do what we say instead of just say it. And our actions are congruent with our values and our morals. And that's hard. It's not easy. There's a lot of pressure. And yet James understood it back then. And God is still pressing it on every one of us.
Yep. No, it was an extremely good message, and I'm looking forward to the next one that you're doing. It's probably going to be on long suffering again, but
it has that theme still.
Yep, we're still in there.
Yeah, that'll be Easter, and so I have a good idea where I'll still be in James, but he brings some things up that are very, very pertinent to Easter. So,
well, and speaking of Easter,
yes.
Thank you for the segue, because we can now go in and talk to you about our Good Friday service, which is going to be on, I think it's April 15th this year.
Friday.
Good Friday.
Yep.
It's going to start at 6:30. It is going to involve our worship team, and it's going to be roughly an hour-long service. And we'd invite you to come out, bring friends, anybody that you know of that would like to come out.
Yep.
It's taking the place of our regular Friday night worship this year.
Yes. Yep.
This month.
Yep. So we'll have worship time, and then we'll see kind of how the night shapes. We still have to talk about some of those details, but there again, that'll be on Friday, April 15th, 6:30 is when we'll start. So.
Yep. Now we need to think of other things to talk about, because I know once I get off and we finish doing this, I'm going to be in trouble for leaving my phone volume on. So let's just keep this going so I don't get into trouble afterwards.
Yeah, that's Ken's fault. So, all right. Well, there again, I think that's probably a wrap up.
I think so then.
Okay.
All right.
Well, thank you very much for checking in on the sermon recap this week.
Yep. And hope to see you on Sunday here in person. 10:30 in the morning, and make sure that if you've got the time, be here at 9:30 for the Empower Hour. We're going into some stuff that is pretty deep, but it is also very freeing.
Yes.
So,
I'd encourage people, if you're available, 9:30 in our fellowship hall. We'll catch up to where we're at, and I think you'll be blessed by some of the content that we're talking about.
Very good. All right, everybody. Thanks very much for letting us drop into your place tonight. Hope to see you again on Sunday. God bless and have a great week.